I'm thrilled to be here, and I'll tell you this year why I'm thrilled is the way this works is the incredible staff for Leadercast sits down and asks the hard questions. What do leaders need to hear? What do leaders need to know? What does the theme need to be? And then they send it to me and they say, hey, Andy, do you have anything to say on this topic? Because we'd love for you to kind of kick the day off. And every year it's kind of challenging, and every year it's a lot of fun for me as a communicator. But this year in particular, as I looked at our theme, which is Beyond You, and we're gonna talk about Beyond You leadership in just a minute, I thought, I can't wait to talk about this, because as we'll see in just a few minutes, this whole idea of Beyond You leadership, and I'm gonna define it for you in just a few minutes, this whole idea, I think for me, as a young leader in my early 20s and then late 20s, even though I didn't have this terminology, this idea that we're gonna talk about, I think made a bigger difference in my personal life as a leader than any other thing. And in our current organization, which is a multi-site church all over Atlanta, then about 25 sites, about 30 sites all over the country, all over the world, this one idea, I think, fuels the leadership culture of our organization really more than anything else. So even though I didn't have this terminology, as we began to kind of tease this out and ask the question, what does it mean to be a Beyond You leader? I got really, really excited. So this is gonna be a fantastic day as you get to hear from all kinds of people from all over the country doing all kinds of cool stuff, actually all over the world. But this idea, I am absolutely convinced, just from personal experience, this idea, if you have the courage to embrace it, and as we're gonna see, it takes a little bit of courage. This is a little bit outside the box. This is the kind of idea that makes you wonder, can I really do that and eat and live indoors? You know, can I lead like this and really, develop an organization? Can I really do this kind of thing and make my way up through the company in which I'm currently employed and hope to stay employed for a long, long time? And I believe the answer is yes, but it might take a little bit of convincing. So our goal, our idea, is to help you become a Beyond You leader, and ultimately, and even better than that, as your influence increases in your organization, to create a Beyond You culture. A Beyond You culture. And imagine this, a culture where everybody in your organization, or everybody that reports to you, or everybody that you lead thinks not just in terms of their own, how they can benefit from the company, how they can leverage their position for their own advancement, but how they can leverage their power, leverage their influence for the sake of those around them in the company, then are those around them outside of their current organization. That's what it means to be a Beyond You leader. So if you're taking notes, and I'm like the ultimate note taker, it's hard for me to listen to anybody without a pen in my hand. I can't read my own writing 2 hours later, but I have this habit that I continue to write because I'm left-handed. I want to give you a definition, talk about it just a little bit, then talk about why you might think this is a terrible idea, and then give you 3 practical applications, and then read you one of my favorite historical quotes, and then I will be finished and we will continue with this incredible discussion. So here is a working definition for the day as we talk about a Beyond You leader. Beyond You leaders are leaders who fearlessly and selflessly, we'll come back to those words, empower leaders around them as well as those coming along behind them. Beyond You leaders, for the sake of our discussion, are leaders who fearlessly and selflessly empower leaders around them as well as those coming along behind them. And coming along behind them, I'm talking about the next generation of leaders. And one of the reasons I love this idea, and I was so fortunate, and some of you've had this, so you'll appreciate it. Some of you have not had this, and so this may be new, and you may be wondering who's got time for that. But I was so fortunate as a young leader that 2 or 3 people, I'll tell you about one at the end, came along around me, people that really had nothing to benefit from pouring into me, sat down with me and poured into me as a young leader and empowered me as a young leader, and they had nothing, absolutely no way to gain from spending that time with me. And I was just silly enough and crazy enough to think that's what you're supposed to do. So from day one, simply because this was modeled for me, like it's been modeled for some of you, but others of you, this wasn't modeled for you, I just assumed that as a leader, part of my responsibility was to look for next generation leaders and figure out how I could invest in them, whether they were part of my organization, part of my company, or not. So let's talk about these first 2 words, then I'll talk about a little pushback you may have on this idea. Fearlessly, leaders who fearlessly means that you're not afraid of the 25-year-old kid in your organization who you know is smarter than you, the one that you hand your phone to and say, would you fix this, The one that has an app for everything and may have written an app for everything. It's that guy, it's that lady, that young lady who's, they're smarter, they're cooler, they're hipper, they just kind of got it going on, and you're a little bit threatened, a little bit. Beyond You leaders decide, you know what, I'm gonna fearlessly pour into that younger leader, even though they may one day take my place. And the room gets quiet. Exactly. Leaders who fearlessly and selflessly, and this is the whole idea, a beyond you leader decides, you know what, I'm going to be a beyond you leader. I'm going to pour into other people, even though there is no personal return on my investment. Even though I'll never be able to look back and say, because I was selflessly involved with another leader or another generation of leaders, somehow I benefited. Now, I'm convinced you do benefit. But selfless beyond you leadership is the leader who says, you know what, regardless of what comes back my way, regardless of if I get credit, regardless of how long I'm in a relationship with this person, I want to do all I can for the next generation so that the next generation of leadership, corporately, nonprofit, in the church, whatever, environment you're working in, that the next generation of leaders is stronger, more focused, and more ready to lead our nation, our country, our world as a result of my leadership than simply doing what's only good for me corporately. Or whatever, regardless of what environment I'm working. So fearlessly and selflessly. And then the other word I want to talk about is the word empower. Now the word power in lots of environments has become sort of a 4-letter word, even though it's a 5-letter word. But here's the thing about your leadership, and you don't think about this, depending on where you are in your organization. But every single leader has power. Every single leader has power. If you set somebody's schedule, you have power. If you determine somebody's raise, you have power. Your words as a leader, sometimes your words as a leader weigh 100 pounds. Sometimes your words as a leader weigh 1,000 pounds. That's a lot of power. In our organization, my assistant, Diane Grant, who's here with me today, every once in a while I'll say, I'm gonna go down there and talk to them about something, and she'll say, no, let me do it. And our little code in our organization is because she says, Andy, your words weigh 1,000 pounds. This is something that needs to be said, but when you say it, it weighs too much. This is something that needs to be communicated. Let's find another way to communicate it. You have power. You don't think in terms of your power because as a leader, you don't think about so much the people that report to you as the people you report to. You don't think so much about your power because you think about how little power you have compared to the people who have the power. But if you are a leader in any capacity in your organization, you are empowered to do something. And beyond you leaders, leverage their power fearlessly and selflessly for the sake of the people around them. In other words, every time you use your power, you're using it for somebody. And what we're gonna talk about today is how to leverage your power and your influence, if you like that word better, for the sake of the people around you. In other words, the empowered beyond you leader asks this question. When they look around the room and they realize, I'm the most powerful person in the room, and that's gonna happen from time to time. There may just be 3 of you in the room, but there's 3 of you and you're the one with the power. You're sitting at the end of a conference table, you're the one with the power. The discussion is over, a decision has to be made, and everybody turns in your direction and says, and you've got the power. The beyond you leader is the one that in that moment decides and asks the question, how can I leverage my power for the sake of the other people in the room? When it dawns on you that you're the most powerful person in the room, the beyond you leader stops and asks the question, okay, but how can I leverage my power for the sake of the other people in the room? So that's our definition. Beyond you leaders who fearlessly and selflessly empower leaders around them as well as those coming along behind them. Now, let me tell you why you might think this is a bad idea. You hear ideas like this and you're sitting here today, you're watching today and you're thinking, okay, Andy, that probably works for preachers because you only work 1 day a week. That probably works for authors because they work from home and they don't really have any employees, okay? That probably works for people who've already made it. That probably works for people who are living off a trust fund and their company's kind of a hobby. This is a great idea for people who have nothing to lose. This is a great idea for people who don't answer to a board. This is a great idea for people who've kind of already made it. And so the pushback on this whole idea is, look, I've got payroll to meet. I've got things I've got to do. I've got people I report to. I am so stinking busy. The whole idea of somehow stopping and asking this very, almost intangible question, how do I leverage my power for the leaders around me? Besides that, nobody did that for you. In other words, when you tell your story isn't this person gave me an opportunity and this person gave me an opportunity and this person came along beside me. Your story is, I got up earlier than everybody else. And I worked harder than everybody else. And my story is, even, if you're, a theist and you believe in God and somehow factor in, your story is by God's grace and my hard work, I've gotten to where I am. So this is a really nice idea, doing things for other people through my leadership. But I don't have time for that. And Andy, honestly, in my industry, you would say, in my company, you would say, my division, my department, you might say, it just doesn't work. There's no reward for that. There's no benefit for that. There's no margin for that. So if during this day you find yourself defending yourself against these ideas with those kinds of thoughts, I want to begin the day by giving you a really big idea, bigger than your job, bigger than your company, even bigger than your career, that I think is the context for this entire day and the context for our entire discussion. It's something that you know intuitively. You haven't thought of it in the terms I'm about to give you because I just made this up, and there's probably a better way to say it. But here's what we know intuitively, and here's the conclusion we all arrive at some point in our life, even if it's at the end of our life. And here's the big idea, the context for today's discussion. The value of a life is always measured in terms of how much of it was given away. The value of a life is always measured, ultimately, in terms of how much of it was given away. Now here's where you are reminded of that. Every time you attend a funeral, you're reminded of this. Every time I attend a funeral, a good funeral, a celebratory funeral, where there's something to celebrate, I'm reminded of this. Because at funerals, you know what? At funerals, we never celebrate accumulation, do we? Ever. There's never pictures of cars and houses and, bank account numbers, and there's never, at funerals, we never celebrate accumulation. At the end of a life, when you celebrate a life, you celebrate how much of that life was given away. At a funeral, we always celebrate generosity and selflessness. Now, think about this for the rest of the day, because you're gonna be sitting here and taking notes, and you're gonna have some breaks. The value of a life, the value of your leadership will ultimately be measured in terms of how much of it you leverage for the sake of other people. The value of your leadership, your value as a leader to this world, to your company, to your family, your children, to the next generation will ultimately be measured not by accumulation, although I am all for accumulation just like you are. We'll talk about that. But ultimately, the value of your leadership, the value of my leadership, will be measured in terms of how much of it was given away. In other words, you don't want to come to that point in your life at the end of your career, at the end of this current, chapter of your life or chapter of your career, and look back and have accumulated, but have no one to celebrate. And in that moment, if you wait too long, and if you don't get this, and if you don't carry this idea of beyond you leadership throughout your career, if I don't carry it throughout my career, what happens is we get to the end of a season of life, we get to the end of a chapter of life, perhaps we get to the end of our working years, and we have kind of a Braveheart moment. The Braveheart moment is that moment where you think, I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back, maybe for some of you, to this very day, to this very season in your career. I wish I could go back, and I wish I could, if I could go back, I would spend more time on leveraging my power and my influence for other people and less of my influence and my power on accumulation. I would be willing, you may say in a few years or 15 years or 20 years from now, I would be willing to give up some of what I accumulated for the sake of influence. To think that at the end of this season of my life, the end of my career, I can look back and I can point to leaders who are doing extraordinary things in my industry, outside my industry, in that company, outside that company, or with my company. Not because of what I did, but because of how much I influenced, empowered, invested in their life. Here's all I'm saying, and then you're gonna be, the rest of today there's gonna be so much inspiration. You're gonna listen to stories and think, I wanna be him, I wanna be her, I wanna do that. I want people to say that about me. Here's the big picture. Ultimately, the value of our leadership, as it is with the value of our lives, will ultimately be measured in terms of how much of it we gave away. We want you to leave here today with crystal clear ideas of how to leverage your current power and your current influence for the sake of the people around you and the sake of the people who are coming along behind you. And if you've benefited from that because you've had people invest in you, then we're just reiterating what you've experienced. But for some of you, because you've never had that opportunity, we maybe today want to create a brand new category as you think about your future and as you think about your leadership. Now here's the trick, here's the problem. In life in general, it's true that we celebrate generosity. but we envy accumulation. Isn't that true? I mean, you go to a funeral and you go, they really were a great person. Then you go back to work, you know? Or you see something on ESPN and it's an inspiring story. You watch the Olympics, it's an inspiring story. You're gonna hear some stories today, inspiring stories. And you go, you know, they were so generous, but then you go back to work. Because at the end of the day, it's true, we celebrate generosity. All of us do, we all celebrate generosity. We all celebrate selflessness. But at the same time, we envy accumulation. And if we're not careful, all of us, me included, if we're not careful, if we are not, and this is what today's about, intentional, if we don't carve out time, if we don't create a new category, if we don't set for ourselves, you may not like our definition, come up with your own. If you don't decide somewhere out there in your time and your investment in your life, it's got to be beyond you and not just about you. If you don't decide, life is such, raising kids and grandkids and all that's going on, life is such that at the end of our career, at the end of our productive years, we'll look back and it will have been all about us instead of all about what we could have done for other people and with other people. And not simply in some generous, altruistic, you know, I'm talking about people that you work with, people that are getting up every day and working hard just like you are. So if we're not careful, that's where we end up. Now, real quick, I want to give you 3 very specific things, and there's 20 things, there's 50 things. In fact, some of you have better ideas than you're gonna hear today because you've been doing this longer than a lot of us. But I wanna give you 3 specific things that you can begin to do almost immediately as it relates to becoming a beyond you leader. And then today, we're just gonna stack on and add on. It's gonna be a little bit like drinking out of a fire hydrant. So, becoming a beyond you leader, one of the things I would immediately recommend is this. Get in the habit of making as few decisions as possible. One of the most empowering things you can do, and if you think of it in terms of the people that you used to work for, that you work for as opposed to the people who report to you, one of the most empowering things that can happen to you, one of the most empowering things you can do for another person, next generation leader, the people around you, is to refuse to make decisions that other people can make. This is probably the low rung on the ladder. This is probably the simplest first thing all of us can do when it comes to being a beyond you leader, because refusing to decide and encouraging other people to decide is empowering. Here's the thing. If you have the power to make the decision and you hand off the opportunity to make the decision, you have just empowered someone around you. That's part of what it means to be a beyond you leader. So we're gonna practice this, okay? For some of you, you've never said these words in your life, okay? So this is gonna be a first for others of you. You've never heard these words in your life. In fact, you're here today with your supervisor or your boss, and you're gonna be tempted to turn and just see if they're even able to say these words, okay? So I'm gonna practice, okay, because you may mumble this, but here's what we're gonna practice saying together. You ready? I'll say it first. You decide. Have you ever said that before? You should practice this at home with your kids. I don't know, honey. He looks like a bum to me, but you decide. So he doesn't have a job, but you decide. All right, so I'm gonna count to 3 and we're all gonna take a deep breath and say this together. This may be the first time you've ever said this, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Whew. It's like, I don't know if I can do that, You say, wait, Andy, if I quit making decisions, hand off the decision making, aren't I gonna lose something? No, you're giving yourself away. You're empowering somebody. Let's just say it one more time because that was hard for some of you. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you decide. I'm gonna let you make that decision. And then I'm gonna back you up no matter what happens. Okay, maybe not no matter what happens, but I'm gonna back you up. You decide. Now here's where this does advantage you, and this isn't all about you, this is all about other people, but here's the big advantage to getting in the habit of empowering people. And again, making as few decisions as possible, because leadership isn't about making all the decisions. Leadership's about, to ensure that all the decisions are right and the decisions that are made are somehow made right. And oftentimes it's not so much that the decision was bad, it's that the follow-up and the follow-through is bad. Isn't that true? Sometimes the decision isn't bad, but if you don't have consensus and people don't come around your ideas, things don't get done. I'm telling you, one of the best ways to build consensus and one of the best ways to build focus in your organization, division, or department is to empower other people to make decisions, because here's something because you've been empowered. When you get the power to make the decision, you make sure the decision is the what decision? The right decision. That's exactly right. So Now here's one of the reasons, this is one of the ways this will advantage you, and you've heard this before, possibly you know this. As your organizational authority increases, your organizational IQ decreases. Okay, as your organizational authority increases, your organizational IQ decreases. I learned this a long time ago. Some of you understand this. You may not have thought of it in these terms, but here's what I mean by that. As you get more and more responsibility, and as you have more and more authority in your organization, you have more and more things under your authority. You become responsible for more and more things. But as you rise up in your division, department, organization, branch, whatever it is that you're doing, or your industry, you are gonna know less and less about more and more things. You're gonna be responsible for things you don't know anything about. And if you are not in the habit of empowering other people to make decisions, you are gonna feel compelled to make decisions about things you know nothing about. Now, if you've ever worked for a leader, a boss, or an organization that's led by somebody who has confused their authority with their competency, if you know what I mean by that? They feel like since I have authority, I have to make decisions about everything have authority over, and yet they're incompetent in areas over which they have authority. You know what a disaster that can be. Where our organization's building a building right now about 5 miles from here. And we're constantly in the construction business, but I don't know anything about construction. I have a degree in theology. So how smart of it would be, but ultimately I'm responsible, I'm the boss. So how wise would it be for me to show up on the construction site and tell, the contractor what I think he ought to do? And we're paying his bills, we're paying, he'd probably look at me and I guess if you're the boss, you have to do that. How stupid would that be? Why? Well, I have authority, but I have no competency. You do not want to go to a church that I was in charge of constructing, okay? A hard hat would not be enough, okay? Now, big example, but this is absolutely true in your organization as well. As your leadership increases, your organizational IQ decreases because you know less and less because you're responsible for more and more things. The way to get there is right now where you are with whatever responsibility you have to develop the habit of empowering other people. And one of the easiest way to do that is to refuse to make a decision you don't have to make and to empower other people to make decisions, because one of the best ways to find out who your best decision makers are is to allow them to make decisions, even though sometimes, of course, they're not gonna do it exactly the way you want to do it. So this is kind of step one in becoming a beyond you leader. It's not all about me. Just because I have the authority doesn't mean I have to exercise my authority. Just because I have the power doesn't mean I have to use my power. Just because I have the I have the responsibility of making a decision, I don't have to make all the decisions. You decide. You decide. You decide. Here's another idea. Becoming a beyond you leader is to get in the habit of working for your team. Here's what I mean by that. Every once in a while, you're gonna give people responsibility, and they're gonna have to leverage their influence in the organization to get things done, but you have more power, you have more influence. So one of the most empowering things that you can do, one of the easiest ways to take a step toward becoming a beyond you leader is to ask this amazing question. And again, don't think in terms of you asking the people that report to you. Think about how empowering this would be if the person or the board you reported to asked you. Here's the question, and we'll say it out loud in just a minute. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? Now just imagine for a minute. Don't elbow anybody, but imagine your supervisor, your boss, walking into your office or sitting down at the opening of your cube and looking you in the eye and saying, okay, what can I do to help? To which you think, no, see, I work for you, I'm here to help you, but what if the person with the power looked into your world and the things that you're responsible for doing and saying, hey, look, I can't do your job for you, but how can I leverage my influence? How can I leverage my power? How can I leverage my position to help you do what I've hired you to do? I'm telling you, this is extraordinarily empowering. Every year I ask my direct reports, my leadership team. I have 3 or 4 direct reports, but I have a leadership team of about 12 people. And so every year they, turn in their, 3 or 4 or 5 things that they want to do for the year. And I look at those, we discuss them, we all talk about them. And then I ask them this question. I say, now that I know what you're going to do, now that we've all agreed on what needs to be done, how can I help? And I ask each one of them to email me 2, at the most 3 things that I can do in the course of the year that would help them do what we've all agreed they need to get done. Because I'm really good at a few things. I'm not good at many things, but I'm good at a few things. So the question is, how can I leverage my talent to help you get done what needs to be done? How can I leverage my influence in the organization to help you get done what you need to be done? In other words, how can I work for you? Because I believe that what you're doing is so important, it needs to get done, and I have more influence than anybody in the organization. So what can I do to help? Here I am. Here's what I'm doing. I'm saying, I want to loan you my influence. I want to loan you my power. I want to loan you my position. I can't do 8 things for you in the course of a year. But what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that if I were to step into your world and work for you for that day or in that environment would make a big deal, would be wind in your sails? And they always come back. 1 or 2 or 3 things. Andy, if you could just do this, it would make a big deal. I'll do that. I'll work for you. I'm going to empower you because this isn't about me. This is about us. And ultimately, this is about you. This is about the next generation of leaders. So let's just say this one out loud as well. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Have you ever asked the people that report to you that question? I'm telling you, this is an empowering question. Now, let me tell you why you don't ask it, and we're going to move on. You don't ask it because you're afraid they might have an answer. You don't ask it because if they have an answer, it's going to require time. If you don't ask it because you're afraid that you might have to get involved in something, ask it anyway. That's how you become a Beyond You leader. This is how you loan your power to and empower people around you. Third idea, and we'll hit this real quick. The third idea is something we call in our organization, empty your cup. Here's what I mean by that. I don't have everything it would take to fill your cup in terms of your leadership ability, what you need to know, your skill set. There's not enough in me to fill your cup. But my responsibility isn't to fill anybody's cup, we say in our organization. We say in our organization, our responsibility is to empty our cup. Our responsibility is to find ways to pour into the people around us what we do know, not because it's all there is to know, but because it's all we know. It's all I know. So we look for opportunities, and we use this terminology all the time. What can I do to fill their cup? Now, I'm not going to tell them everything they need to know. They're already smarter than me. They read more than me. They're better educated than me. But I want to make sure while they're working with me, while we're working together, at some point, I have an opportunity to empty my cup so that when they go on to whatever they do or whatever they continue to do in this organization, they will have the advantage of knowing everything I know about what I've asked them to do. One of the most empowering things you can do as a Beyond You leader is to look for opportunities to empty your cup. Now, here's the thing. Well, I learned this the hard way by encouraging our younger staff to do this. You are smarter than you think. You know more than you think you know. You are not as behind as you may feel like you are behind. You have something to offer. And sometimes it's as simple as sending an email out with an article you read and say, hey, I just read this article, thought you might enjoy reading this. I'm just I'm passing on to you something that's helped me. Here's a book I've read. Every once in a while, I'll get 3 or 4 or 5 of our middle management kind of people who don't report to me, people who never spend time with me, but people who I think are really sharp leaders, men and women who I think, gosh, so glad they're in this organization. I want to make sure they know what I know about something. And I'll say, hey, I want us to spend a few weeks together and go through a book together. Hey, I want us to meet for breakfast for 3 or 4 or 5 Thursday mornings or every other Thursday morning. And I want you guys to come up with 3 questions and we'll meet. There's no agenda. You set the questions. I'll answer the questions. I buy breakfast. It's just, in a way, it's just an opportunity to make sure I'm not going to fill their cup. It's not even my responsibility. I'm looking for a way to empty mine. The guy that did this for me years ago is a guy named Charlie Renfro. Charlie had an outdoor business. Very successful guy. He just saw something in me in my late 20s and said, Andy, let's have breakfast. And so that began an every other Tuesday morning breakfast that went on for years. And I'll tell you what, Charlie would walk in, he'd be in a suit, he'd have cufflinks, he was all decked out, he was very successful in his cool BMW that, back when, there weren't even that many in the city of Atlanta, it didn't seem like. He just had it all going on. He'd walk into the original House of Pancakes, and I was working for my dad, really didn't know what I was gonna do with my life. Would sit down and he'd come in and say hello to everybody in the restaurant. I'd get there early because I got my questions, and he'd sit down and he'd smack this big old gold ring on the table and he'd say, Andy, what you working on big? What you working on big? I'm like, nothing. I know that, nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, like big in my world is I took 40 kids to Six Flags and I got them all home safely. Is that big? He's on his way to New York to do battle with the bankers because his company's upside down and he's talking about things I don't even understand. What you working on big, Andy? Come on, what you working on big? I'm like, nothing. But week after week after week, Charlie sits down and asks me that question. It finally dawned on me. Charlie thinks I can work on big stuff. Charlie thinks my life is the kind of life that may one day have responsibility for the big stuff. And Charlie's still a dear friend of mine after 25, 26 years. And every once in a while, when we're doing something big, we're raising a bunch of money or giving away millions of dollars for stuff or building a new building, I'll get a text from Charlie. He'll say, now that's big. Now I'm telling you, 26 years later, I'm still talking about Charlie Renfro because he saw in me the potential as the next generation leader. And he decided, I've got a little bit of time for that one guy. No agenda, I'm just gonna walk in and you ask me the questions. He taught me the principle of the 500-pound gorilla. 500-pound gorilla, principle is when there's conflict and when there's issues and there's people you wanna avoid, you walk up to the cage, you open the cage and you invite the 500-pound gorilla into the room. And there were times I was trying to avoid conflict and avoid people and this is difficult. He'd say, whoa. That's a 500-pound gorilla. Andy, you go down there, you open that cage and you invite it into the room. Don't you run from that. 26 years later, I'm still talking about that. Still something every once in a while I look at my wrist and it says, what would Charlie do? That's, my wristband is WWCD. What would Charlie do? I mean, Jesus too, but Charlie, Charlie, he told me what to do. Now my point is this, you can do that for somebody. You can do that for somebody. I know what your objection is, well, Andy, when I'm the boss, I'll start doing this when I'm the boss. As soon as I'm the boss, I'll start doing this, okay? Let me just tell you why this isn't true. If you don't start it now, you won't do it then. Because once you are the boss, you will think you became the boss by hoarding and not helping. You'll think you became the boss because it was all about you, not beyond you. But if you start now becoming a beyond you leader, if you commit now to becoming a beyond you leader, if you just take some baby steps, if you start thinking outside the box, if you find those one or two people that have extraordinary potential in your organization and you begin to invest in them, you will have something to show for your leadership just beyond the things that you accumulated. You are going to accumulate the rewards of your success just because you're leaders. I mean, that's gonna happen. The question is, who are you bringing along with you? The question is, who's coming along behind you? The question is, who are you around almost every single day? And a little bit of leverage, a little bit of empowerment would go a long, long way. I'll just close with this. If your leadership isn't all about you, it will live beyond you. If your leadership isn't all about you, it will live beyond you. Now listen, but if your leadership is all about you, it will not live beyond you, other than the fact that you will serve as someone's bad example. And there's not a person in this room, there's not a person listening or watching that wants this. You have the potential to be a beyond you leader. And the time to begin exercising your beyond you muscles is right now, where you are, with the influence you have, where you are currently employed, the industry you're currently working in, the job that you currently have. So for the rest of the day, you're gonna be inspired. For the rest of the day, you're gonna get more principles, more information. But at the end of the day, our heart's desire is that you would become a leader who fearlessly and selflessly empowers those around you, as well as those who are coming along behind you. This is gonna be a fantastic day. Thank you so much for allowing me to get it kicked off.